Aloha and good morning. This is Clint Hansen with Maui Luxury Real Estate and MauiRealEstateRadio.com. You're joining us today on the KAOI radio group that's broadcasting at 7 a.m. on Monday. That is broadcasting on 11:10 a.m., 97.6 FM, 98.7 FM, and our friends on the west side at 95.5 FM. Today we have repeat and well, soon to be regular guests because people need these economic updates. Would you guys introduce yourselves? I'll start with Reta Chin.
Hi, everyone. I'm Reta Chin. I'm from Fidelity National Title and Escrow. I've been in the Maui real estate industry since 1990, and I am really happy to be here to tell you about what's going on in the market.
All right, and Paul Brewbaker.
Hi, Paul Brewbaker. I'm a private consulting economist, many years in Hawaii commercial banking, and lots of time on Maui with Reta and Clint and others in the industry, keeping track of things, which we were just talking about. I'm glad to do virtually now and save up my trips for fun rather than work.
And your consulting firm, TZ Economics.
TZ Economics is the brand. That's correct. Yeah.
And then what's your educational background?
Oh, I undergrad at Stanford, did some graduate work at Wisconsin, finished my PhD at Manoa.
All right.
And got the Certified Business Economist designation from the National Association for Business Economics. They took pity on me.
You poor thing, you poor thing. So here I want to talk to everybody. Obviously, this is Maui Real Estate Radio, so most of the things are geared around the economy and results to real estate and how the real estate market is doing. And of course, the residential side is absolutely bananas right now. I have over 13 escrows and have been very, very, very busy. And the financial markets play a big role in the liquidity of things. So obviously there is another side of the coin too. Real estate is just a small aspect. It's where we all live. And that's affected by a lot of external forces, not just the local economy and business. So when it comes to that outside and tourism and retail, of course, those are suffering dramatically, restaurants and whatnot. So first, let's talk a little bit about the economy, broadly speaking, in the United States and how things are going. And then we'll kind of focus a little bit more towards the financial markets and some of the concerns coming up, even though right now the residential market is doing good for a great variety of reasons.
Sure. You want me to start with a little bit of a macro overview?
Yeah, let's do the macro overview.
So it's been a year since, it's been almost a year since we were told that like a miracle, it would disappear. And by a certain ex-president. And it's been a year since I remember the LG February 2020 reassuring everybody that Hawaii had no confirmed COVID-19 cases until I sat in a room on March 6th with the head of Dr. Desmond, the head of the testing group over at the Department of Health's infectious disease branch. And we were on a TV interview and he said, oh yeah, no, we didn't start any testing until March 4th. And I was like, wait, so we had no cases because nobody was tested? So that's how things were a year ago, if you recall. And then we all freaked out and went and bought toilet paper. And then we all hid out for a couple months, and that crashed the economy pretty hard, about a 30% annualized decrease in US GDP in the second quarter, 40% in Hawaii. And then a not quite equal, but almost as dramatic rebound in GDP in the third quarter as we came out of our caves to see the sunlight. But unfortunately, many people did so without proper safety protocols. Mine, insufficient mask wearing. The bikers all had to go to Sturgis, South Dakota, I think it is. And so by November, North and South Dakota were the most toxic COVID infested or SARS-CoV-2 infested places on Earth ever. And we had a really hard fourth quarter where things started out really optimistic. At one point, I think GDP now, the weekly forecast of contemporaneous GDP growth from the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta, at one point it was forecasting 11% growth in the fourth quarter, pretty good numbers. The final number was 4%. And so the recovery stalled a little bit on the ascent and is trying to find some traction right now. It's reassuring as case counts, and I think over the next several weeks we'll see mortality abate. Some of that seems to be seasonal. It's a little too early to attribute to the vaccine, but we know that that's coming, and so the anticipation of economic recovery and maybe even tourism recovery by this summer starts to become more real. And the downside, of course, is that we're seeing long-term interest rates back up a little bit. I think the 10-year Treasury note yield, which was about 0.8 or 0.9% 6 months ago, is up about 50 basis points, maybe, treading into the 1.3% area, which of course is very low, but nevertheless, the direction it's going, which is a process of normalization that you would expect in the economic recovery, will mean slightly higher rates and may take a little bit of the wind out of the sails of the residential real estate market.
Yep, got to still have that, quantitative easing, more cash injections into the market.
That's the Fed's put all of that in place. It's set its target at near zero for the overnight rate. So that that's there. They've told us their long-term objective for the overnight rate is about 1.5%. I'm sorry, 2.5%, which would be consistent with longer-term yields closer to 3% than 1%, as we've seen. And that would imply a mortgage rate, up around 4.5% by the time we get back to normal. When is that? Easily out in 2022 to 2024, and more likely 2024 for Hawaii than 2022, which is possible in some places across the mainland. So it's going to be, yes, the Fed's set up, put everything in position, indicated that it will wait for inflation to average 2%. That means since we had about 5 or 10 years below 2%, you could easily expect inflation in excess of 2% for a significant period of time before the Fed changes its policy posture. And when you combine that accommodation in monetary policy and the implied relatively low interest rates, although they're normalizing a little bit now, with fiscal relief / stimulus, right? Last year it was relief. This year it's moving towards stimulus in one form or another at one or another level of governance. The die is cast for a durable economic recovery, up to the next surprise, which could be a virulent mutated variant, the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle version of COVID-19.
COVID-19.
I was raised by geneticists. My dad's a plant breeder. My grandfather was a plant breeder. My dad used to say, the viruses are evolving faster than our ability to deal with them. So we're going to need to remain vigilant and to, learn some enduring lessons from this recent experience, because in the arc of history from 1919 to 2020, we kind of got lucky and didn't really have to worry. And there's a lot of people alive. I mean, I'm old enough to remember, polio vaccine. I went to elementary school before there was a vaccination for measles and mumps and rubella and pertussis and I mean, so we all got it. I got mumps, I got measles, and thankfully I didn't get polio because that did come along. But that memory, right? Some of the baby boomers lived it. Many of them have forgotten it. Fewer still have heard the stories of the 1918 pandemic. And even smaller fraction of people have studied the Black Death of 1348 and the ones that brought down the Constantinople in the 6th century, et cetera, et cetera. So there's some evidence that Bronze Age civilizations disappeared because of catastrophic pandemic events and or epidemic events. And my dad had a theory. He's a corn guy. And he had a theory that it was a maize mosaic virus that came across the Caribbean, wiped out the staple crop of the classic Maya civilization that
Okay.
contributed to its downfall because
Well,
the
I didn't know
genetics is all there.
that.
So the anthropologists disagree, by the way, but I'm just saying there's a theory out there.
I've heard a lot of different theories of why they crumbled from, viral and bacterial infections to, socioeconomic to political, but
Sure.
they were a massive society that encompassed, tens of thousands of acres and millions of people, and it all just shut down almost overnight. And being in the middle of, the tropics, things just completely took over. And that's why there was a lost civilization until I think the 1860s or something like that. But back to our society, and hopefully we don't deal with that. We don't want it to crumble around us. Now, we have shifted a lot of our economic dollars to more experience-based things, which of course has affected Hawaii very specifically. Maui and Oahu, Kololave, maybe not there. That wasn't so much a visitor location. But they have a strong visitor fueled economy. Oahu's more military based with a large population that's there, but nonetheless, when you go over to see where the dollars are being spent, it's actually quite interesting. The amount of consumption is actually dramatically increased. A lot of people are looking to fill the void in their lives of activities and friends with things and purchases. Everybody's sitting there late nights bored and buying on Amazon, as opposed to being able to go out and do stuff with their friends and family. And so much so that warehouse locations are at an absolute premium, and they're anchoring ships oftentimes for 9 to 14 days off the coast. And just a dramatic drive to bring things in to distribute. Of course, with the infrastructure breakdown during this winter, it's going to only get worse with the storage space. But can you talk to a little bit about our local economy and how it's been damaged during these times with less visitors that are here?
Sure. Well, there's a combination of structural attributes and structural changes, attributes that were characteristic of the pre-COVID economy, some of which will persist, and then structural changes that were accelerated, if not precipitated, by the coronavirus pandemic, and both are having outcomes which you identify correctly as possible sources of opportunity, as well as risk to people comfortable with the way things used to be. In terms of the structure, you correctly characterized the neighbor island economies being more tourism oriented, maybe 40% of GDP or value added, almost half, directly and indirectly attributable to tourism exports, right? These are sources of income or expenditures from overseas that we sell to people from other places. On Oahu, it's more like 10% military, 12% tourism. So the two are of roughly equal magnitude. And of course, the military piece is unchanging, even though tourism has gone to zero. So the neighbor islands took a much bigger hit and have a much deeper hole from which to climb out of. And each of the neighbor island counties, in turn, is challenged with, trying to dial around the protocols. There's some confusion about, varying rules from place to place, but obviously a strong desire by communities to be in control of themselves as a destination and the rules governing, the comings and goings. But we have a basic protocol in place now that is, in principle, a basis for the restoration of tourism. It's people just aren't getting on planes. That's just the bottom line. They can get a test and then get on a plane, and they're just not doing it. Now that the big seasonal winter wave of coronavirus infection has abated, maybe there's some opportunity there. But meanwhile, as you also correctly identified, patterns of consumption have changed even among residents. It's not just the people visiting, but it's the households, local households expenditure patterns, which also have changed. Now, in general, they subsided dramatically. So in addition to the loss of export revenue, there was a decrease in consumption, but more fundamentally in terms of where we go from here, there's been a huge shift away from brick and mortar retail and the entire distribution chain that supplied those physical spaces for purchases as well as activities. You pointed out, the average shopping mall has been moving towards an activity-oriented focus and away from strictly being sort of merchandise-oriented. And as a consequence, the switch towards electronic e-commerce delivery of goods and services, changes the landscape for commercial real estate as well as residential real estate, because in addition to the reduced demand for the physical spaces in which to dine out or in which to purchase merchandise, there has increased a demand for places from which to distribute, meals to be delivered at home, or items to be, last mile delivery in the new e-commerce supply chain that was already there, but has rapidly grown to displace the conventional, old school brick and mortar retail distribution model. And we're seeing that everywhere from sort of the big anchor tenants at regional shopping malls, as well as lots of pressures down at the, at the mom and pop level.
So with that and the change in the economy, right now things are actually going incredibly well in the residential and real estate market. Condominiums have been, fundamentally slow for a long time, but in this last month we saw a dramatic bump up, and we'll get into that. But a lot of that, of course, is fueled by low interest rates, and the financial markets play an absolute massive, role in that. Back in 2008, when the subprime crisis, which we touched on our last show, that was fundamental blocks of loans would fail at such a dramatic rate that the rate of return would drop, and then the liquidity of banks to be able to loan money completely failed. So regardless of what the Fed set the rate at, they just didn't have that ability to, fuel their own, assets and give more additional cash after that. When the supply of money drops, of course, they can't lend out, and then the interest rate increase, which caused the crash in the real estate market pretty dramatically. In addition to just overall fears and the underwhelmingly slow response in order to deal with that. Now we've been a lot better at dealing and fueling and stimulating the economy, which is absolutely fantastic, but one of the underserved portions, because people are focused on other people, which is great, and we should continue to do that. The small business loans that are out there, are fantastic, but, there are these larger fundamental chunks called collateralized loan obligations. And those make up, as big as a section, if not bigger of a section of, what keeps those, the economic engine going. When they turn them into money-making blocks and put all these loans together, they sit in a bank's portfolio, which they can count on those monies coming to fuel everything in their lending. So what's happening, of course, right now with the, addition to the retail apocalypse and, larger retail shops for goods, going away, with the internet becoming, much more of a part of our daily life. Generally speaking, there is not people going out there because of what's happening with COVID, obviously. So we're seeing these failures, on restaurants, entertainment locations, retail spots on a very large scale, and they're trying to eke out a survival. They're not able to pay their rent, which is of course going on. We're seeing it here locally in Maui, which, Reta was willing to share with a text this morning. You saw the, what was it, the business for our local
Business
ahead.
news that lenders are foreclosing on the Pomona Mall. Yeah, and
Yeah.
then another mall on the Big Island as well.
And
So it's that ripple effect.
yeah, and hopefully, if the current administration is smart enough, they'll put, stop gaps in place to help these places survive, even though I think eventually they're going to have to shift their paradigm and move to more entertainment-based things like internal go-karts and, places for people to go. And, that's why people are starting to put DMVs inside of malls and, semi-school locations, because they need to diversify as opposed to just being the standard stores that you see in every mall in the United States. So that being happening, what are you seeing? Have you done any research on these loan obligations, these blocks, for
Let me approach this area of interest from a layering standpoint and start at the foundation, which to which you referred earlier, which is kind of the plumbing, of the financial system and the credit flows, which was impaired in the financial crisis in the early 2000s and then had to be rebuilt. And so it's much stronger. There's more rigorous attention to credit worthiness built into the structure of the financial industry, which, like retail and other sectors, has become more fintech oriented, right? The brick and mortar is disappearing in financial services, just as it is in food services or retail distribution. A majority of mortgages today are originated online. And last time I checked, which was 2 years ago, the nation's largest mortgage lender was Quicken. So that architecture, that plumbing system, so to speak, was rehabilitated, made stronger, made more resilient. And I think in the context of the current recession, which of course was precipitated by an exogenous event, has demonstrated its resilience. And therefore, when you start to look at areas, and you mentioned collateralized loan obligations in particular, where you could, so we need to think a little bit about the structure, but you have a regional shopping mall or an office building or something for which credit has been provided through a commercial loan from a bank. Commercial mortgage-backed securities are a form of pooling where those loans can be put into the pool and then securities issued from that. And collateralized loan obligations more generally are these structures which essentially pool risks so that investors, even banks who have originated mortgage loans, can sell the loans to the aggregator and then buy back the securities from the structure, and are assured as a consequence the benefits of risk pooling, so that even though one or another building may fail as a credit from time to time, the integrity, the credit worthiness of the structure as a whole benefits from this pooling. Well, in an event such as we've gone through in the last year, those credit risks are latent in the fact that stores are closed and businesses have gone under. Restaurants haven't been able to operate at full capacity, if at all. Arts, entertainment venues have almost completely, that's the worst hit area of economic activity everywhere, not just in tourism destinations. And so those strains have emerged. A lot of the reckoning, the so-called resolution of these problem loans, has deliberately been deferred in the residential arena through through eviction moratoria and forbearance in place of foreclosure. And to a certain extent, that's also occurred on the commercial side. How it's been a year, however, and you can only sort of move those dates out into the future for a finite interval before some kind of resolution structure, some kind of protocol and algorithm, if you will, a rule governing, how much of a haircut the building owner versus the tenant will have to take, or how much of a haircut the lender or the lender's shareholders versus the borrower will have to take. And we go through these kinds of crises from time to time. It's usually the case that they emerge within the credit system. Again, in this case, it was an exogenous event that affected all of us. It's sort of out of the blue and into the black, and which gives it a special status, which makes it one of those events that we don't just go out and foreclose on everybody.
Yeah.
But we're approaching that moment where so creative minds have to be brought to bear on the resolution process. And I think that'll be a project for 2021 writ large.
That's my big project. I mean, while the creditors are going to the mall right now and talking to them and starting the foreclosure processes aren't something that happen overnight. They take months, sometimes years, to go through, consolidation of debt so that that loan can be serviced better, and federal assistance. So in all likelihood, you're not going to see the mall shutter. There's just an economic pressure right now that's going to need to be resolved one way or another. And dependent on how the government creates programs to help alleviate these, inequities in our system, it's up in the air right now. And that's my big fear. I mean, the reporting that I see on these blocks is so delayed. I mean, they're, 3 to 4 months behind, unless, you have a specific panel in your industry, kind of upper banking management. And I don't know if you could shed any light on how the failure rate is going right now. I have no idea.
I'm a retired banker technically,
Yeah.
so I don't have the same insights that I used to. But I will say this: the Hawaii is a judicial foreclosure state, and there's a reason why, for better or worse, that it has chosen that particular structure for resolution process, because it's ordered and people know what the rules of the process are, and the intent is to facilitate orderly transition and facilitate orderly exit rather than disorderly or chaotic additional disruption to the economy. And the banks are much more vigilant in their monitoring of risk exposure, and more diligent about working with clients who find themselves for no reason of their own. I mean, who knew that a viral pandemic was going to show up? So there's a sense in which everybody is in the boat together. We should try to have a little faith in the nature of the structure that's already there to resolve these problems. And as quickly as possible, I would add, to encourage our leaders to embrace opportunities to facilitate a change and transition where they present themselves in a novel form which has not been experienced or realized earlier. So give an example I heard on a webinar the other day. If you're a venture capitalist and you have an idea to start up a new tech company, how many regulatory obstacles exist between you and the realization of a conversation with investors? Not that much. Okay, how difficult is it to open a restaurant or to start up a nail salon? I mean, if you just think about the licensing and permitting requirements to start a very mundane, sort of ordinary run-of-the-mill business, as opposed to one of these, big data or AI or novel, software or internet-oriented businesses, it's a problem. It's a problem at a moment where we need to get the economy as much as possible, get the Maui economy as much as possible moving in a different direction. How hard is it to build a house on Maui? This would be the time to make it less difficult. And I'm hearing stories about, is it the 201H blah, blah, blah. The fact that there's like a 201H blah, blah, blah to begin with, not to mention that certain leaders in the planning or home building political community on Maui are suggesting that there should be a 75% affordable housing quota in 201, which is the accelerated format for, I mean, okay, 75% of zero is zero, and that's what you're going to get. And Maui's been moving in that direction. In fact, I could show you the slides if they were on this computer, which I don't think they are.
You know, what I would say though, and I've mentioned this before in previous radio shows, we need different economic vehicles in order to incentivize developers. You know, the whole thing is people are like, developers are bad people and what they're doing is wrong and they're trying to exploit Maui. And, you know, you need to give them the opportunity to build, because, you know, let's say you've been waiting 25 years to get a water meter and you've owned this property, and then you finally get that water meter so you could subdivide, so you can have a place for your kids, because there's no possible way that they're going to ever afford property here unless you work on a partnership with them. And then you go and you say, okay, I want to subdivide this property so that they can have something for their kids and migrate, you know, so on and so forth. And then they look at the now standing fire requirement in order to put in a 50,000 gallon tank, you know, in addition, you know, so a fire hydrant needs to be in place now. It's like, okay, so this went from a cost to get a water meter, which is significantly high. I think it's, you know, close to $20,000 or something to get a water meter now, which you should kind of be built into the costs of water for general expansion and infrastructure increases. Instead, there's a, you know, a cost. And then on top of that cost, they're going to have to, you know, put these new regulatory, you know, stops in place, like a turnaround for a fire truck. You know, when this is a 3-acre estate that's not surrounded by any trees, I don't know why you need to put those in place, but it makes it impossible, literally impossible to build unless you're incredibly wealthy. And that's it. I mean, the cost of being poor is substantial. I mean, it's really, really hard, where, you know, a person, you know, they can barely afford to pay their, you know, $2,100, $2,500 a month in rent, but they can't qualify for a loan, which they'd be paying for $1,100 a month. They could pay, you know, less than half as much on a mortgage, which that goes to save themselves. And as you say, put them on the escalator, you know, to save for the future. And they can't, because they can't qualify with the more stringent regulations. I think regulations are important. They should be in place. But Maui needs something different, because our cost of building are so much dramatically higher. Cost of land is higher. But even if you were to give a developer land for free, there are major costs associated and huge time hurdles to overcome. I mean, it's 15, 20 years to put entitlements into place. That's a lifetime. That is a literal career lifetime for somebody. I've been selling real estate for 20 years, and that would mean from the time I started on one project, I'd only be finishing now. I'm 40 years old, and half of my life would have been for one project. Then
it's pretty crazy how that's become the norm. Some of the people I've worked with, I've worked with one client that waited 20 years, took 2 trips to the state Supreme Court, went to the Land Use Commission 3 different times, the state Land Use Commission, not to mention whatever county barriers to entry had to be surmounted. And to be fair, because of the urban character of Oahu, those barriers don't seem to be quite as much of an obstacle as on the neighbor islands. But I will say this: if you look at the housing economics literature, Honolulu is notorious as the most difficult metropolitan area in the country, you know, empirically, in which to build. So 20 years is kind of the norm. I'm working with another developer who's been, I'll put it this way, I once met the CEO. So there's the landowner and then the company that was going to build the homes. I went to the CEO's retirement party and I asked him, you know, what was his proudest achievement? And he said, well, I actually didn't have an achievement because I've been here 30 years and we haven't been able to build these homes.
Yeah.
So that's, and he has entitlement.
And if you think about
that's a whole nother thing. Even when you have entitlement, you don't have entitlement. So that's the new thing in Hawaii.
Entire teams of payment, millions upon millions of dollars, you know, just basically sitting there, you know, on the hamster wheel, going and going and going. People think that those costs just get erased. Okay, no, that's how much you got to put the money in the land. It's like, oh, okay, It's not just the bricks and mortar and concrete. It's that entitlement that is the major cost associated with building. It's like, oh, people look at it like $200 a square foot, $250 a square foot in order to build. That's not too bad. No, 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 no. You got to think of all the stuff that it took to get beforehand.
Oh, sure. And the opportunity cost of capital for 20 years is
work on a method. And my whole thing is to use the only real resource that Maui has in order to build properties. I mean, we have billions of dollars that get funneled off to foreign corporations and off-island corporations through tourism. If you were to build neighborhoods, and we have about a 10,000 home shortfall in Hawaii, and then you had those tourism dollars going to subsidize the costs, then that would incentivize developers to put the time and money into build those neighborhoods and then bring them down to a controllable cost. You can say, hey, 2-bedroom place, 250,000, 3-bedroom home, you know, 350,000, a 4-bedroom home, like an actual place for people to live, 450,000. It puts it barely into the affordable range for, you know, the massive shortfall we have. And it actually creates a vehicle that benefits specifically the local economy, not just foreign interests. So those monies go into the developers who live and work here, the construction crews that live and work here, the equity that goes into building the home goes to the people who are getting these tremendous deals. And then it helps stabilize the affordability of Maui's market. Right now, all the available homes, you know, are being fought over by, you know, people coming from the mainland that want to work from anywhere, which I totally understand. And I would want to be in Maui too. That's why I'm here. But the problem is they've been out of work for 9 months and they can't pay their mortgage. They're like, well, geez, I should probably either A, rent out a room, or B, sell my house. And the funny thing is people aren't selling their homes because they're getting the forbearance, which the very, very limited inventory is just skyrocketing. I mean, I know people were talking to me on the internet, you know, 9 months ago, and they're like, oh man, prices are going to drop. And I'm like, no, they haven't really increased even since 2008. They have barely, but we haven't seen a spike yet. We are going to see a spike. And with liquidity coming in, you're going to give more people the ability to buy. And with these huge paychecks that they're getting from their corporations in the mainland, where, you know, $250,000, $450,000 a year, they're have no problem to afford a place, even if they're just going to live here for 6 months and then, you know, rent it out long term or whatnot. It's a good investment because I've had people contact me on a regular basis looking for a place to rent for $50,000 a month. They're like, I'll spend $50,000 a month. And I'm just like, well, you know, first of all, I'm not a property manager. I'll connect you to people. And then I talk to, you know, people I know that like Canadians, and they're saying, hey, yeah, no, since I can't come out there, I'll rent out my house for 20, 30, 40, 50 grand a month. And they're happy. But there's, of course, another section. That's a massive loss of, you know, use in capital. So why not buy something out here, even if you're just going to be using it for that period of time? And they're doing it. There's literally nothing for sale under 3 million, any single family home in Wailea right now. And South Kihei, North Kihei is just as bad. The affordability has just gone out the window. So there needs to be a vehicle in place to create more affordability that specifically benefits local people. And until the processes changed or additional vehicles are put in place, either or, nothing's going to happen and prices are only going to increase. Even if, you know, 3,000 homes were to get foreclosed on and 3,000 local people were forced to sell, which is awful, that's barely going to put a dent in the amount of supply that we have right now. I mean, the shortfall in the properties is just catastrophic. And people just don't realize that you're seeing prices increase. Wait until 3 months goes by. Wait until 4 months goes by. We're only just starting to see condos increase in price. Wait until 2-3 months from now when people are able to come and visit. And yeah, it's not a good situation that we're in.
Yeah, this among the many novel impacts of the novel coronavirus is this phenomenon of remote work and telecommuting, which existed in a small portion of the workforce pre-COVID, but has become a much larger fraction of the workforce. And even though, we expect some of that to go back to more of a pre-COVID configuration, there's going to be a permanent increase in the proportion of workers who work remotely, and as a consequence, literally can live on Maui and work elsewhere. And so just that additional source of housing demand, even if temporary, right? It may not be that they live on Maui full time, but they can come over for several months, as you say, and become sort of the vagabond workers that technology now has enabled, and that workplace custom has now come to accept, particularly in the high productivity, high skill, high compensation portion of the workforce. That additional demand on the housing stock, which we've just described, has not grown very rapidly on Maui at a moment when people aren't selling their houses either. That's the other big thing, is people have just been hiding out in their homes. The listings have not gone up as much as demand has, and against a backdrop of supply, which is a fraction of what it used to be in terms of the flow of new housing units each year. So it's kind of a train wreck. The only, the relief valve is prices, and as you say, there's upward pressure on them. And ultimately, the only solution is to re-engage in the production that allows for the filtering that occurs normally. I mean, the affordable housing tends to be the older housing that has, in a qualitative sense, that is less appealing than the newer houses with all the newfangled, amenities. And so that process, when you build new homes, you initiate a process of filtering whereby the older, lower quality housing units end up at the more affordable end of the spectrum. And when you cut off the new building, you cut off that filtering. So we all, everybody's first house is actually a bad apartment in some complex that was built in 1963 or 1957, two-story walk-up. And then you move to some, your first house was some old plantation cottage that was built in 1949. I'm just saying that's the process. That's the actual process by which people enter the housing market. They don't, people don't buy a $450,000 house the first time out. It just doesn't work that way. But when you cut off the production of the new houses, you inevitably cut off the availability of the affordable, older, lower quality units that, houses last longer than we do. That's why they're still around.
And I mean, you say $450,000 house. I just listed a Kihei Shores, 2-bedroom, 714 square foot place. It's nice because it's a townhome. There's nobody above you.
Yeah.
You could have gotten into it like $350,000, 5 years ago. Yeah. And now I'm listing at $450,000. I mean, that's a 2-bedroom place. And that's as much as a house was, 10, 12 years ago. And
so it never has been, as you point out. The whole point is to get on the escalator. Yeah. But the problem is that it's always moving. And unless you have some place through which to get in to the market, those older, less attractive units, you're not, and if you're not building them, they will never be there. But what's happened, of course, since the pandemic is this entirely new source of demand has shown up. The solution is not to, join some political organization opposed to the, to new people coming to Maui, because that never works. And besides, all of you guys are new people that came to Maui. So shut up already. We all are.
Right.
So,
it surprises me statistically how many Native Hawaiians are in the mainland. There's more Native Hawaiians in Vegas, I think, than all of Hawaii.
There's more Irish in America than there are in Ireland. I mean, you just described the history of the world. But yeah, we all came from somewhere else. Maybe we didn't paddle here, but yeah.
you know, and upward mobility of all people throughout. And that's what we want to really see. We want to see
There you go.
all that vehicle to be able to come back to Hawaii that are from here and reinvigorate the culture and society. Unless we have systems and places to give that as a possibility, people are going to have to go where it's more affordable. I mean, they need to, the cost of living is the number one cost out here. And there's plenty of people who are going to be willing to buy. And it's a lot of, you know, feel of like creating or getting value. You drop something 2%, people think that they're getting a steal, even though it's, you know, 15% of where it was just 2 years ago. And I think, you know, we need some of those mechanisms in place. Speaking of that, I know you're time sensitive. Are you able to stay for the rest of the show, or do you need to go to your next meeting?
What time? How long are we going here? Because
we'll probably got
turns out
another 20 minutes, I think.
Oh yeah, okay. It turns out the thing I thought that was happening in 5 minutes happens in an hour. So.
Oh, beautiful. Okay.
I think
So,
I should have done that, but.
To say that and really get an understanding of where we're sitting right now, I'd like to hand it off to Reta Chin to talk about some of the local economy.
Please.
And our.
Yeah, I'd be curious to hear. And by the way, the first podcast I was ever in was one done by Reta on her iPhone.
Oh, beautiful.
So that's right. And Paul, it's so good to see you. So what have we learned? We have learned, one, that we can live honestly remotely, working remotely. We can live really anywhere with the kind of jobs. And that's what we're seeing is this huge influx. And I'm going to get to stats in a minute. I think what COVID has taught us is that life is short. So we're seeing a lot of people, even a coworker, moving back to the mainland because of all that's happened and wanting to be near family. So I know your listeners can't see my screen, but you guys sure can. I really want to zone in on what really transpired and look at and talk about what.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, I mean, this is really amazing, you guys. So pendings are green and blue are sold. We saw, of course, the third, fourth week of March and in April, this huge drop in pendings because one, people got scared, they lost their jobs, they couldn't rent their places. And so we saw a huge drop. Now, Paul, we always talk about a V recovery, and this is a pretty good recovery, as you can see. I've been in the market or in real estate since 1990, and I just want to point this out. Back in February 26th of 2020, a really healthy market is about 500 pendings, and that includes all kinds of properties on Maui, timeshare, commercial, everything. There were 634 pendings at the time. In April of 2020, that dropped 324. And our Fidelity statewide operations, we had 27% cancellations of resale transactions. I just pulled the stats yesterday. I have never seen 700 pendings, and we are at 764. And like Clint says, the inventory, I mean, we have seen cash deals, quick closings, and I want to talk specifically of the significance. So you will notice that we had 411 pendings in January. So we do expect historically in Maui real estate, it does get busy. January, February, March, this is our busy high season, but still with this virus has turned everything upside down. We have been busy from September on. I think
Reta,
yes.
or just a technical question, remind me how this process works. The pending sales are the ones these are contracts into which people have entered in the last month or two?
Yeah, so these are all pendings monthly. And so when a buyer and a seller, the principals come together, they open escrow. So they're in escrow. And the sold.
So I'm just curious how much of the January pending is a reflection of year end? Like people, is it people who contracted in January, or is it people who contracted?
It's typically
the green 411 pendings are people who contracted, and
in January.
In January.
It's just fascinating to me that
it's fascinating.
After the New Year's party, they went out and contracted a house.
Well, and this is Maui, and who honestly wouldn't want to live here? And there's some significant reasons as to what's happening here. Another significant thing, you guys think about it, in April of 20 last year, it has always been condos sell way more than homes. So it's about 59% of the deals that record are condo deals. Look at in less than a year time. So we ended the year last year at almost half, 51% of the deals that recorded were condo sales. And now in January, it dropped to 48%. And the home sales were 38%, and that increased to 43%. So the things that are significant are the activity of the market, the shift in the condo and the home sales, and secondly, as we all know, the median sales prices, which I'm going to, so the median sales prices right here. And it's really, to me, super sad as of January. So the median sales price for Maui homes is $980,000. That's the second highest in the state. Hawaii is over $1 million. Now, I can't help but think the fact that that island truly shut down, and we're a lot stricter than we are in Maui. It's an inventory issue. People see and perceive Maui and the state of Hawaii as a way safer place. In talking to a lot of realtors and a lot of principals, they see Hawaii as a place that's safer. You know, it's not crazed with people. And the way that we've handled the fact, the quarantine, the testing, etc. Sadly, the condo has just stayed the same at 560. The land prices have increased. A lot of land have gone into escrow, Mahana Estates on the west side, and then of course Discovery in McKenna side. So that's significant. But here's where I think it's really interesting that you guys may not know. So I was talking to the director of admissions at Maui Preparatory Academy, which is a small private school in West Maui. Great school. My niece graduated there and in a killer college in Boston, and my other niece attends there. In March of 2020, they had 130 students. So what happened in April, a family from Silicon Valley connects with the school, and they're thinking, they want to take our kids out. Let's check out other places. They contact the school, and they literally moved here. Well, from that point, they then told other people, Silicon Valley and Menlo Park. So the roster at Maui Prep in March of 2020 was 130. In August of 2020, that rose to 240. And then this month, the roster now is 276 students. That's a 112% increase. So what you're seeing, it's huge. And it's because about 49 families have moved from Silicon Valley, their families over here. And that's why West Maui has absolutely gone crazy. I have here, and I know your listeners can't see it, but I just want to show you the pending. So Paul, as you may or may not know, South Maui has always been the number one. Usually 1/3 of the properties are record down here in South Maui. It's a mix of high end and condos, and that's usually West Maui and then Central. But just looking at, I was just digging into the data. West Maui this is January 1st pendings to yesterday. So this is just from the first. 210 transactions have gone into escrow in West Maui, 48 homes, 136 condos, whereas South Maui, 194 transactions with 42 homes and 150. What we're seeing is those families, there are a ton of families. So they're capped out at Maui Prep in certain age class groups in their roster, but that is what we're seeing. What's really driving the market on that side are these families. I did notice in the closings in January, there were about a dozen Kahana villas, which is the McKenna high-end condo closings. They're listed, they sold from 4 million to 7.5 million. So about 10% of the closings in January, just to give you an idea, home sales, 10% were over $3 million. And 10% of the closings for condo sales were over $3 million. And where are they happening? It's South Maui and West Maui. So it's significant what's happened with COVID, changing people's perspective of life, their perception and their ability to work outside of their home on the mainland, and then coming over here and finding this place, which we all know is just a beautiful place. But as you want to point out here for West Maui, since January 1st, they have 38% of the pendings. 4 out of 10 properties are going in escrow on that side versus 35%. So it's sad to see the home prices have increased, and the demand, it's a supply demand issue here on Maui, and on Kauai. It's crazy. I've never seen the market like this.
Starting. That's what I'm trying. Like, I explain that to people, and I've been able to accurately predict where things are going to be going. And you know, I explain to a lot of my clients, I'm like, they're like, I'm going to come in February, and I'm like, no, you should have really come last month. The way I see it, there's not going to be anything available by the time February comes. And I had a multitude of clients that came. And, you know, of course, there's literally nothing in that, you know, $2 to $3 million range at all, especially not under $1 million. I mean, I have a multitude of buyers that I'm working with to try to find things. So there are things that you're not seeing that have come to the active market that are being replaced and people are purchasing. And people like that because it saves them escrow fees, because we don't have to list the home and do the professional photography and the videography. It's going to happen with condominiums too. It's already happened with high-end condominiums. Wailea Point does still have some good values in there, but the inventory evaporated in there. It completely disappeared. And you know, you used to be able to get a nice 2-bedroom, lived like a home, Wailea Point, oceanfront, like oceanfront for $3.5 million. Now, of course, it's going to be $4.5 to $5.5 million for that very same product. You could still get a $2 million place in that same complex with a partial ocean view, or a 2.5, you know, with which and a loft together for 2.5. But those lower condominiums that are, you know, 900,000 to, you know, 500,000 and 500,000 and under are going to be gone by the end of April. It's not going to exist at all. They're going to all disappear really, really quickly. And people don't seem to really understand that when I say it, that, you know, you have a lot of people, and a lot of the older people are getting vaccinated. They're finally able to come out here, and they can come to a place that's relatively open. They can walk around. The weather's better. You know, it's not -10 degrees for weeks at a time. They're going to be here, and they're not going to be able to find a rental. It'll be cheaper to buy something that they're going to be able to rent out eventually. So you're just not going to be able to get those same opportunities. It will happen. It's coming. You just wait. So,
you know, in January closings, I was looking at this. So January closings for condos on Maui, the average percentage, owners got 98% of the list price for condos. For homes, 97%. What we're seeing, Paul and Clint is involved in so many of these transactions, multiple offers over list price. And just this morning, if you have a buyer, I noticed that a Wailea home just went on the market for less than $3 million. So we know that they're going to have so many multiple offers on that, so many showings on that because of the demand. And it's crazy to see the median sales price, the year end. So last year, January 2020, we started where the median sales price for a single family home was $741,000. 1 year later, 980,000. So when you look at someone who wants to put a 3% or 5% down, that's $30,000 to $50,000 they're going to have to put down on if they're on a median sales price home of 980,000.
Let me jump in with, and I presume I'll get an invitation to come back by the Realtors Association in the summer and have an opportunity to look at the data, which I have not. So just as a warning, you're showing me the data and I'm going, wow, I can't wait to get into this data set. And I customarily do every summer, but it's winter right now. But with that caveat, here's what I think the data will show. And so let's just curb our enthusiasm a tiny bit, or concern, because yes, going from 750,000 to just under $1 million at the median, it's probably in a 12-month period is not sustainable. So let's think for a second about why it might not be bubblicious either. It could be that, and we've been through bubbles, and we don't want.
We've been through bubbles.
Let's not have a Japan bubble again. Let's not have a subprime bubble again. But there's definitely what technically we would call an impulse response that seems to be working in these data sets. And I haven't been through the data set, but my guess is what's going to happen when I do is you'll see those high-end deals we're talking about pulling, if you can think of the distribution, you know, it's
Yep.
not a bell-shaped curve because most of us are peasants and live in a small house in a neighborhood, you know, somewhere close to work. And then out at the tail end of the distribution is, you know, Barack Obama's crib. And so when there's a bunch of those transactions, they tend to pull the median over. And I think something like that is happening right now because of the pandemic. As you say, all of a sudden, people, particularly high skill, high productivity, highly compensated individuals in leading edge companies that could entertain remote work, all of a sudden were confronted with a situation where people could not collaborate in proximity in the same physical space, went to remote work and found that it just worked fine for their company. And so by the end of 2020, 6 months after the pandemic started, approaching a year now, many companies have made this, the decision that we're just going to stay like this. And so, as you say, there are people in a position to choose to live on Maui who continue to work in Menlo Park or wherever. My niece is a teacher up north of San Francisco. What's it called up there? Anyway, Sonoma County. And a lot of people commute down to the city. But she says in her school now, and her schools are remote, right now, a lot of her students, families have actually moved to Hawaii. And they're still going to her school in Santa Rosa. So the phenomenon you're talking about, it definitely exists. My guess is that it's partly a one-time, we were talking about e-commerce was already there, but we all just totally decided to use it more intensively. And we are forever after going to use Costco.com and we're going to do the drive-by at Target. Do you guys have Target on?
Oh,
We
yeah,
do
we
have
got
Target.
we got Target.
Right, where you get on your phone. This is how I shop at Target, right? I get on my phone, I buy my printers, whatever, and then I go by and they throw it into the back of my car. So those one-time shifts that the pandemic induced have also occurred in the housing market. And I'm thinking what we're seeing is a reflection of that. And because some of your viewers some of your audience can see on screen, if you'll indulge me, let me share you the survey results. So these are surveys of companies that have economists. Now, what kind of a company has an economist? I would argue a very leading edge and smart company. But so, it's not common for companies to have economists. But in those companies that do, a large proportion of them are now working in a configuration where most or all employees work remotely. So as we've said, on the demand side of Maui's housing market, a bunch of these people realize, I don't have to live in San Jose or in Santa Clara County, California. I can live in Bozeman, Montana. I can live in Utah. I can live in Lahaina or Kapalua. And so they busted a move, and they busted a move to all of those places, by the way. Top 5 states for population growth in the middle of the pandemic: Arizona, Utah, Idaho, Nevada, all the 4 Intermountain states, plus Texas, Florida, and the Carolinas. On the supply side, as we just talked about, what's been going on Maui? Here's a half century of data on the numbers of housing units authorized by building permit in the upper left-hand corner. It's been declining for 50 years. You can see the trend decline in the lower left of this graphic, and you can see how the trend decline accelerated, how it went down at a faster rate after Maui adopted its 50% affordable housing rule. And you can see in the upper right-hand corner the decomposition of the home building cycle, which is or was in the late 2010s, pre-COVID, going into the downturn of this long-term housing cycle. So on the demand side, you have possibly a one-time increase from remote workers, and I imagine after a year, the dust will settle. Everybody will have moved to wherever they were going to move, and the thing will settle out. But on the supply side, there has not been a response. There has not been additional homes. So they're all it's musical chairs, it's musical houses. There's more people running around, and as soon as the music stops, there's somebody without a house, and that tends to be the lower income households.
Well, thank you so much, everybody, for today. I really appreciate you coming and discussing, the current economic state that we're in right now. Hopefully, people will come to the realization that inventory is what really drives price. And, they think that if you can, even if they forced 100% affordable for development and they didn't allow any more luxury property entitlements to come into place, it really doesn't matter because there's other encumbrances that prevent affordable property. And until you create a means to actually make it more profitable or even possible to create affordable property, it's simply not going to happen. So thank you so much, everybody, for coming today and discussing. Paul, Rita, thank you so much.
Great to see both of you guys again.
Good to see you, Paul and Clint.
Yeah. Look forward to our next show, and I think probably April for the next one, just given where things are going to be. And we are, absolutely. We're broadcasting on the KAOI radio group. That's 1110 AM, 97.6 FM, 98.7 FM, and our friends on the west side at 95.5 FM. And you can always go and listen to any of my podcasts or watch our shows like this through Zoom at MauiRealEstateRadio.com. Bob and Donna Hansen and I, and we now have a team of 19 different agents in our office that we work collaboratively with. We're like a big family, and it's a great place. Our website now has, I believe, 42,000 unique individual visitors coming to it every single month because of the information that's available on it. So if you want
the beach cam.
Yeah, and the beach cams.
I use it.
Yeah, if you have power at your house, you can see what you're missing in Maui. And that's at MauiRealEstate.net. And so that's MauiRealEstate.net to search and look at all the listings that we have, as well as everything that's available on Maui, the tax information, statistics on all the different condominiums and trend lines, as well as these statistics that we talked about today, or just listen to our show at MauiRealEstateRadio.com. Aloha.
Bye, guys. Thanks.